For anyone who hasn't met me before, my name is Michael Lewandowski. I lead the financial service practice here at Method. We're really excited to have a topic today that I'm particularly passionate about as a longtime payments geek. So we're going to go deep into agentic commerce. But don't worry, if you're not a financial service geek by nature, agentic commerce is certainly something that impacts folks from all industries. And so we'll look at it from a multi-sided perspective and hopefully provide some good insights for everyone. So again, if you're in the room, continue to grab food. There's drinks in the back. I also want to welcome anyone who's joining us remotely as well, too. From a format perspective, Mike and I are going to have a chat up here. We've got some topics that we're going to go into, but we will leave some time at the end for questions. So whether you're in the room or remote, please think through whatever is pressing and top of mind for you from a agentic commerce perspective. And we'll make sure that we leave a little bit of time at the end to address those questions. So without any further ado, I'm really excited to have our guest here today. Thanks for coming in, Mike. Appreciate the travel.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself to the audience, and then we'll dive into our topic.
Sure. Thank you guys so much for having me. Mike Storiale. I lead innovation, payments, and AI for Synchrony. For those of you that don't know Synchrony, we're one of the leading financial institutions providing private label credit cards, financing, buy now, pay later, and among many, many other products to our partners and our cardholders.
Thank you. And I did want to start there, Mike, and talk a little bit about Synchrony in the ecosystem, a little bit of a unique value proposition, a different spin than other players in the market. So if you don't mind, just talk a little bit about Synchrony's business and in particular related to payments and how it will impact how you think about agentic commerce.
You know, I think one of the things that's really interesting is that in many cases, the way that we go to market is actually with our partners. Right. So for those of you that maybe haven't experienced interacting with Synchrony before, if you're going to one of our partner merchants, you might get offered a buy now, pay later loan. You might get offered a private label credit card. And that's often branded with our merchant. That's something that's really important to them from an economic standpoint. It's really important to our cardholders because oftentimes it's going to be some of the best value financing you can get and the best loyalty. And so for us, when we think about where agentic commerce is going, if that's something that's really impacting the way that people discover and purchase products, then that impacts the merchant and it also impacts the way that we go to market.
Yeah, and I have a lot of respect for Synchrony in that regard. Many years ago, I was running product for a healthcare lending startup and quickly learned as I was doing point of sale lending that, Synchrony had been an early mover, a first mover likely in this merchant partnership and integration of payments. And so it was really looking at the portfolio and the things that had been done by Synchrony at that time that drove a lot of what I did back in the day. And so a very unique take. And I think certainly when you think about payments as this intersection of consumers, merchants, and then people who are facilitating payments from a financial services perspective, that triad is always important to how something like agentic commerce takes shape and how those competing needs ultimately play out to really determine who the winners are going to be.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Well, great. I want to kind of get into just what is agentic commerce and what is our definition so that for anyone who may be coming in with notions or, as someone who hasn't yet been exposed to the concept yet, maybe we just define agentic commerce, broadly, and then in terms of the conversation that we want to have today as well.
Yeah, so hopefully many of you have tried, at least so far, to discover products. Synchrony ran a study at the end of last year, which is showing us that well over 50% of people are discovering products on AI platforms. So when we talk about agentic, we're typically talking about how you're going to start to discover and buy products in these platforms. And a lot of that is through chat, right? So you're in either ChatGPT or Gemini or Perplexity or any other platform that you could think of. And you're not only asking questions to find the right product, but you're then also deciding what product works for you. You're deciding how you're going to afford that product if it's something that you need financing for. And then you're completing the checkout in that flow. And for a minute, it was really focused around those platforms only. Now what we're seeing is that that's also moving to all of the merchants themselves. Right. So you might see Milo or Alexa Plus, which changed from Rufus today, or some of the other names that are out there, Sparky from Walmart, that are these agents that can help you specifically on a partner's website and do a lot of the same things to find that financing, find the product, and allow you to check out.
Yeah, I wanted to spend a minute there, and I think that's great. You talked about discovery. Let's talk about the ways in which these flows are manifesting themselves already, as well as maybe some of the forward-looking ways in which we're anticipating these flows will manifest themselves as well, too.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's interesting is that customers have kind of led us here. You know, we always look at trends and how trends are evolving. And one of the things I often think about is who brought us to that trend? Is the trend being forced upon somebody, or is the trend actually something consumers are leading us to? And consumers started using AI to find products pretty quickly. Turns out it was a lot easier to describe what you're looking for, upload a picture of your living room, rather than knowing what an Eames chair is and having to search for that specific thing, right? And so that's where they started. I think what was really interesting about that is when you think about agents, we've long believed, I think probably many of us as consumers have believed, that it would be really easy if I could find a product and then not have to go somewhere else to buy it. And the value of agents is that we can actually send agents from these platforms to go to the merchant's website and complete that purchase. And so I, as the user, can enter in either my credit card credentials or my identity credentials or whatever other option might be on that platform. And now the agent goes and makes that purchase on my behalf. And right now, maybe that's product by product. But you can imagine how that continues to grow as you look at something like redesigning your entire office, which might be a multi-merchant experience or have a long tail of discovery that happens over time as you're refining something. And so that ability to really make it a lot easier for a user, or even making it easier for you to maybe buy something later, right? So when the price hits a target that you like, or when something comes back in stock that you want to buy, and so you don't have to be sitting on with reminders constantly trying to find it.
There's a lot there I want to unpack, and I want to start with familiar patterns because I think that's a beautiful statement that you made there. And and who creates those patterns, and certainly search, it was a huge part of that, right? And so in the first wave of digital with the internet, with Google search, that became the mechanism, the habit by which we became comfortable identifying which products we might want to use. Certainly, large language models have tapped into that comfort level in terms of chat-like features that mimic a search-like criteria as well, too. And so I think that's a really interesting place to think about because you talk about discovery as the natural starting point for this. And so a very easily adoptable consumer type of behavioral pattern to say, hey, if people are already searching for something in products, services, et cetera, how do we create a similar experience for agentic that goes down that pathway, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if some of us are old enough to remember being taught how to use search engines back when it really mattered if you used quotation marks and commas in the order that you put things in. So clearly both of us are because you're laughing. And then at some point we moved to, a couple words. We would start to shout things that we would never shout in a store, right? You wouldn't walk into your favorite furniture store and shout brown couch, but you would absolutely shout that into a search engine. And then we went to phrases. And now what we're seeing is that those strings are longer, right? I don't have to think about what to search. I can describe what I'm looking for. And that's really exciting. It also changes a lot of things when you consider what that means for a retailer. If, my wife was searching for a dress that she can wear to work and to cocktail hour, does your metadata or information on your website or your app explain whether or not that's something she could do? Is that something that you're easily able to communicate in an agentic commerce experience? Because we're talking about the payment cycle, but you've got to show up there before any of that happens. And that's quite a mountain to climb.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm embarrassed to say, having just gone through a move, I may have walked into a store and just shouted brown couch at one point in time in the past week or two, but that's another story for another day. I think you kind of naturally went there. So evolution of a flow, right? We're starting in this era of discovery. We're seeing nearly 50% of consumers start to adopt it. The next stage that I'm hearing about and seeing is the straight to checkout process. So human is still initiating the search. However, agent is able to lead you all the way to the website to actually make that transaction, but still human transaction, right? And you're starting to talk about what are some of the factors that are needed from a retailer perspective as well, too, to be able to bring that to reality, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of that that's already in market today, right? There is an acronym soup out there of all the different protocols that are available. Synchrony has been a part of nearly every protocol that you see out there, but I think what's been interesting there is what do you need to now know that changes in an agentic commerce experience? As a bank or as a merchant, I probably want to know what your intent was Did you intend to buy a yacht or a yacht bath toy? Is pretty important for me. How long ago did you ask for this thing? Are you in the loop right now? Is the human in the loop right now somewhere? Or did you ask for this 3 months ago and maybe you forgot about it and I'm worried that you're going to return it? Do I trust the bot or the agent that it's coming from? There are all these new signals that start to come in. And then you really start to think about what it's like for the consumer, right? As a consumer, what am I putting into that platform to be able to complete that checkout? Do I feel comfortable? Do I know who I'm buying from? Does that matter to me? It might or it might not.
Yeah. And then, from a stage perspective, the next would be the agent completes the transaction on your behalf, right? And a human may still review that transaction as part of that flow, right? And
yeah, I think right now, as for a lot of these experiences, we're still talking human in the loop, right? So when we look at that, we talk about it not taking the final action without you, right? So we talked about things a minute ago, like if I want to say when this hits a price, I want to make that purchase. Now that's out there. Google has a buy for me feature. So do many others. And if you think about that buy for me feature, I might say, hey, I really like this pair of jeans. It's $100. But I don't $100 like them. I $85 like them. And so when they hit $85, I want to buy it. It's not going to automatically make that purchase for you yet because the human's not in the loop anymore at that point. What we're seeing right now is that it finds that price dropped and then asks you and then goes and makes the purchase on your behalf. But you see a world coming pretty quickly where that human maybe does not have to be as in the loop as they are now. And that is a pretty dramatic shift from a pattern standpoint.
That's right. And then there's the final step. And I always think back to a great leader at one of the leading banks I had worked with, a chief digital officer. He used to say 8-9 years ago, is it available digitally? Is it intelligent? Is it autonomous? And it's funny thinking back 8 years ago now, and autonomous was a vague concept, but that's the final stage, right, Mike? We're getting to this place where those instructions, if they fit certain thresholds, if you've given them to an agent, we could not be far away from a flow where it could be fully autonomous.
I think that's right. And I think for a lot of consumers, that sounds really exciting, right? Because as a consumer, there are a lot of people who do not like shopping, who find that to be a really tedious experience. There are, of course, many of us probably in the room who really do enjoy that, who enjoy the wander, who enjoy the ability to kind of stumble upon something new. But for those who don't, or those who maybe just need a little bit of assistance, this is like having a concierge in a way that many people never have before. And so that ability now to be able to trust that my payment is going to be secure, that I'm protected, that I'm buying from a legitimate merchant, that my identity is safe, all of those protocols powering that are the things that the banks and the merchants need to be able to support so that the consumer can feel really well protected and comfortable with the transaction.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, not to dwell on my recent move too much, however, we did have about 9 cans of artichoke hearts in our pantry when we moved. And so some of those autonomous features may be strongly limited once we get that process going in my household. But that's no knock on artichoke hearts. They're delicious. You've already been touching on it quite a bit, Mike, in each of those flows, but I want to give it its due time, and I want to give it its due time across merchants, across consumers, and across FIs. Let's talk about needs. Let's talk about the needs of each of those parties and where Agentic has the ability to potentially fulfill or, maybe put at risk some of those needs as well, too.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first places we can look is where the merchant needs to go. And so there are new protocols like UCP, for example, that allows merchants to be able to expose their product catalogs, expose the information about their products, expose the commerce side to these platforms. And those protocols are really important. We've been talking with merchants a lot about what that uphill climb felt like 30 years ago when you had to take 2 million SKUs and put them online. That is, in a sense, some of what we're talking about right now is being able to take everything that I currently have as a merchant, put it somewhere new and discoverable, and then think about how that impacts my strategy, right? Because it is about supporting the protocols. It's also about understanding what does it look like when maybe somebody can't as easily find additional purchases, when I can't make that upsell. Are these agents or bots that I trust? How do I know when I trust them? And so, the first place is for merchants to be able to look at their existing platforms and identify whether or not they can participate there. And the hard part right now is it's not going to be easy to bet on a horse, right? There are a lot of new opportunities out there, and all of them have their merits. And so finding where the consumer starts to go and which protocols end up being the leader, everyone keeps going back to VHS and Betamax. I guess that's never going to die, that debate.
Everything comes back.
It all comes back to that. And that really is where we're at right now, is being able to support multiple standards, try multiple different things, and see which one is powering your experience the best, or just which direction it lands.
Yeah, and I'll drill a little bit deeper on the merchant side. Having serviced merchants as part of the payments ecosystem in prior roles, you learn very quickly that transactions completed is the number one objective. If there is inventory or a service that can be optimized, that transaction being able to be fulfilled via any payment method possible in that moment without abandonment is absolutely critical. And so something like Agentic from a merchant perspective absolutely appeals from that perspective, right? In terms of really optimizing the likelihood of a transaction.
I think that's right. And I think a lot of it now also is going to come down to identifying who that customer is, right? So what does that identity look like? What do I want as the merchant? Do I want to be able to allow a logged in state? What happens to things like loyalty, right? There are so many other components here that are really important for them to be able to consider.
Yeah, and then to stay there just one additional moment, what you also learn very quickly is what merchants don't like are chargebacks or returns, right? And so when you think about an agent identity, is this agent acting on this consumer's behalf? Are there disputes? Are there returns? Are there chargebacks? That's kind of the nightmare scenario for merchants, right?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about how most companies, a lot of us here are on digital teams. Most companies for the last 20 years have said, if I don't know the bot, I don't allow the bot on my website, right? Or in my app. That agent now, that bot is acting on behalf of your customer. And so that changes. But the risk of first party fraud, right? The risk of somebody saying, I didn't make that purchase. I don't know what you're talking about, when in fact they really did make that purchase, is huge. And so being able to understand, how do I trust this bot? Do I know who's on the other end of it? Those things are going to get really important for us to be successful.
Yeah, and absolutely, from a merchant perspective, from a consumer perspective, from a financial entity perspective, we've all encountered this notion of being known, right? And whether it's the financial institution side of we're account numbers, not necessarily human beings with many accounts, whether it's the merchant side of wanting to truly understand purchase behavior and optimize your loyalty to a brand, and as a human being, just wanting to be known for your value and what you bring to any given situation, right? These are challenges that become that much more layered and matrixed with agents acting on behalf of humans, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you look at some of the conversations that we're having with our merchant partners, and it is very important to a retailer to know who is making that purchase, right? I need to know not only who they are, because that's the way my advertising works, my retargeting works. That's the way I know what demographics are purchasing my products. It's also important though, because loyalty is real, right? And making sure that I am able to either reward that customer or give them the offers that they need. And when we talk with our partners, that is really significant, right? That's not something that you can kind of just brush off and say it doesn't matter if a bot performs on behalf of the user. The bot needs to be able to identify itself, identify who it's acting on behalf of, give some of that data through. And I think one of the interesting things we're seeing is with protocols like UCP and others, we're really starting to standardize how that data continues to flow through. And I think that's going to be exciting for giving retailers the opportunity to participate in a way that is meaningful without losing some of the things that are so important to them.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Well, let's move on then and talk about consumer needs, because you talked about a lot of the ones that financial institutions have been trying to meet for so long. Let's just bring up some of the ones that you've mentioned already, if you don't mind, in terms of what are consumers generally wanting when they're in an active commerce. What are the considerations that are going to drive purchase propensity and or financing options in that purchase as well too?
Yes, I mean it's complicated because every customer is going to be different. And what we've been talking about a lot is, as people are using these platforms to chat, decide, and buy, that chat might mean I'm also asking things like, what's the best way for me to afford this? And that word best is going to be different for every single person here. Best might mean that I should use that retailer's card because it gives me really great loyalty. It gives me really good promotional financing. It allows me to space it out over time. Best might mean something else for you. And so a lot of it right now is about getting those pieces in there so that the consumer can better understand. Most of these purchases, at least this is my view, I don't think too many people are going to one of these platforms to ask for the best toothbrush. Maybe somebody in here is. I'm not. I am going to find a couch or to find something that is typically going to be a larger purchase, a longer tail. And those are the areas where people need financing, right? They need to find out, how am I going to be able to afford this? And they want to maximize that. We know consumers have a lot of FOMO when it comes to thinking that maybe they didn't maximize their rewards or maximize the way that they could have paid.
Yeah, no, I think you hit on quite a few, but I'll just double down on them and we can drill into maybe a few as we go through. But clearly, trust is a massive one. There are many people who are distinctly of the mindset that they want to make sure that the form of payment, that the merchant that they're providing from, they're purchasing from, that there is a trusted relationship there. And that has long been a thread by which you establish a strong relationship with a customer on either the merchant or the consumer side. Agentic is only going to magnify that for that population, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, in many cases, that relationship that a customer has with the brand is built on trust. And so, when you're bringing a new customer to that brand through an agentic experience, that is important for the brand. We've been talking about that already, but it's also going to be really important for the customer to be able to establish that new trust.
Yeah, I view that as one of the value proposition vectors that many will choose and succeed on as they get into agentic commerce, because there will be a massive trust hurdle for that to really get the adoption that's required. A second one is that rewards one that you talk so much. So many of us in this room are likely optimizers of points, and the era of having to go to the points guy or whomever it is you're following is kind of behind us, with the agents as a possibility for that. Just talk a little bit around, what your experience has been from a loyalty perspective, or, just kind of the value of that within this agentic commerce experience, or even conversely, how that might impact financial institutions as well, as some of the legacy loyalty propositions are potentially disrupted.
Yeah, I think from a value proposition standpoint, the good news is that we have really great relationships with our merchant partners, and consumers are not single faceted, right? They're multifaceted. That means that they're not just buying online. They're not just buying an app. They're not just buying from an agent. Their needs change regularly, and many of them are going to weave in and out of different ways to buy. And so I think, agentic commerce is a piece of that. And one of the things we need to make sure is that loyalty does persist through there, right? It is going to significantly disrupt your experience if the first time that you go to make a purchase through this ecosystem and you're already a loyal customer of that brand, you cannot apply your loyalty points. Or you find out later on that it was a guest checkout experience, and so you didn't get your loyalty points. Or your private label card maybe didn't work, and so you weren't able to get the promotional financing or the multiplier on that loyalty. And so those things are really important to customers, and they're really important to our merchant partners as well. And so bringing all of that integration in is something Synchrony's been really focused on, making sure that not only do the technology companies understand how important this is for the customer and how important the economics of this is for the merchants or the brands, but also understanding where those integrations need to happen and how we can help make their agent smarter. Because if the agent can answer better questions, like, could I pay this with points, or how should I maximize, then that only means they're going to come back there more frequently in the future.
No, I think you put that well. And I couldn't agree more that Synchrony, again, back to where we started, has that unique position in the market to partner with merchants on this journey and help think about things like loyalty, like trust, all of the competing factors along the way. We don't have to drill into price, because we're not talking merchants here, or maybe speed of delivery, but those are always critical ones for consumers. The last one I will want to drill into, though, with you is financial health. And thinking through that, both from a consumer lens in terms of where agentic has a possibility to really aid consumers' financial health, but also from your lens as a financial institution and how you ensure the products and services you're providing to a customer are best for them and their needs.
Yeah, we talked before a lot about how agentic commerce, how retailers in agentic commerce could get their products in there. We focus just as much on how our financial products also get into these ecosystems, because it is really important for customers to have a place that they can go, that they trust, that they can ask the right questions, that they can get truthful, non-hallucinated answers is pretty important, especially when we're talking about something like finances. I think aside from your health, probably your money is the next most sensitive thing to most people. And a lot of people do have those questions. I mentioned before, what is the best way for me to purchase this? That is not going to be the same for anybody in this room, right? Every single one of us has a different best. Now, the benefit might be that over time, the memory of the agent that you use or whatever platform you choose actually does start to understand that better. And as banks like Synchrony build the integrations to these agents, that also gives the capability over time to understand more about you, to understand what products you already have, to understand what's available to you at what price, right? Because financial products, there are different price points. There are promotional financing. There's the ability for me to pay over time. But then also try to understand a little better, what could you be doing, right? Are there other things that you could be doing that would actually help you afford whatever it is that you're looking for?
Yeah, no, well put. Well, lastly, let's talk about your needs as a financial organization. And when you think about agentic commerce, what are the things that you're wanting to make sure are critical components of any solution so that you continue to be a profitable, a trusted organization, one that manages risk, et cetera? I would love to hear your take on that.
I mean, it really goes back to what that experience is going to be like for the consumer, right? So we're going from a search experience to a chat, decide, buy experience that's in one platform. So we break it down into a couple pieces. I mean, the first is that we need our merchants and our consumers to be able to use the payment method that works for them, whether that is a co-branded card or a dual card, or the ability for them to use private label or buy now, pay later, or their loyalty points. We've got to make sure that people are able to use the payment method that they prefer, and that our merchant partners are able to preserve the economics of that as well. The second thing is we really need to make sure that we've got the right authentication and identity on those platforms. As we support the different protocols, that allows us to make sure that we're supporting multiple LLMs, but also supporting multiple ways to identify who the customer is, to hopefully prevent fraud, to mitigate some of the risks that come with this as well. And then I think the biggest piece of this is really about making sure that we're staying at the forefront of where customers lead us to as well. I mentioned before that there are areas in this that I don't think people were expecting. I don't know that every AI platform would have sat here 3 years ago and told you that the percentage of people discovering products on their platforms would have been as high as it is, or that they would have been asking to check out on those platforms so that they can just be done with shopping and go somewhere else. And so it's hard for us to predict where the consumer is going. We learned a lot in the last year as we deployed some of these products. We learned where the customer got confused and where the customer got excited about what was next and what we were building. And we'll continue to iterate and make progress on those.
No, that's a really good perspective to have there. I think naturally, before we go into how to approach these, I kind of want to talk about what's at stake here. Just from your perspective, from any numbers that you've heard around the projections of moving from discoverability to the potential for transactions, how do we frame for our audience today what is at stake for a financial institution and just kind of in terms of market share as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I was talking with a partner the other day, and I said, could you imagine what it would have been like in the early 2000s if you got delisted from Google? Like, would your brand be here today? I think this has that level of impact. When you're talking about getting into one of the agent platforms, one of the LLMs, if your products aren't showing up there, then that might just mean that you don't exist to the consumer. Now, I think there's some really exciting opportunities there, which is that if I always start my shopping journey on the same brand today, maybe new small brands get discovered because I described something I wanted for my office in such a way that the agent found something I never would have personally found before. I was going to get, 4 sponsored links at the top, and then this brand was going to be 3 pages below the fold, and I was never going to see it. Mm-hmm. And so there are some really exciting opportunities there, but the risk of your product not being found And then the risk of disintermediation overall for financial institutions, and making sure that the products that we offer are still able to be used and are front and center there. Because if not, then that opens the door to a lot of disruption.
Yeah, I think, for anyone who's not familiar with just how much revenue and how many transactions are done from a payments perspective, we're talking about less than 2% of transactions globally right now are being done via agentic, with projections that could be as high as 25% in the coming years. And that's on trillions of dollars. And so we're talking from going from a billion to trillions of dollars processed. And all of the players that take a little piece of that payments pie along the way have the potential to be impacted, just as Mike is saying, in terms of if you're not relevant, if you're not part of that wave, that could quickly shift your economics and your business models, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, being able to adopt the protocols early is really important in that space. And I think, to your point around just how large this potentially could be, every number that's coming out from any of the consulting firms is in the trillions with a T, right? I mean, and that is massive if you think about where consumers are going to find these products and how they're going to shift.
Yeah. And so let's talk then a little bit about how do you approach this? And especially, I think it'll be great for the audience to hear you as Mike Storiale in innovation. How are you and Synchrony starting to approach this? And then what are, we can get into some of the capabilities that we're needing to explore as part of that process as well, too.
Yeah, so I was talking with different people in the room before we started, just around how we think through innovation and failure. And it's baseball season. Hopefully some of you guys are baseball fans. I was talking earlier this morning and saying, if you're a baseball fan and your favorite player strikes out 7 times out of 10, they go to the Hall of Fame, right? That means they had a 300 batting average. That means they're pretty darn good. And when we think about innovation in this space right now, we're looking at it from a win-loss ratio like that. You got to be able to take some big swings and learn and be willing to fail fast and quickly move on. You get to be sad about the failure for a second, but you need to be able to take that really quickly. And then I think, one of the other things is there's a lot in the marketplace that's trying to look at each individual deployment and then either claim that that's going to be the big win, or when it gets turned off, it's the big failure. Turning a product on for 6 months to learn about what customers want, and then taking the best parts of that and turning it into the next product doesn't necessarily indicate failure. That indicates learning. And a lot of times what the customer tells us they want and then what they do when we actually give them the product are not the same thing. And that's a lot of what we're learning here. These are the earliest of early adopters who are using these products today. And so these are the people who are most likely to understand the product, who are most likely to have the patience if something goes wrong. And so if they get confused by it, then we definitely need to pivot.
I love that perspective on innovation that you share. And what I would love to dive a little bit further then into from there is, what is the team construct as you're thinking about agentic commerce? Who are the people from the organization that you're bringing in to experiment in these areas? And then maybe also, how are you partnering with some of your business partners in the traditional lines? And how are you engaging with them so that you're nimble, you're ready once you do find something that has traction?
Yeah, so I think right now we've stood up dedicated agentic commerce teams, but they are mostly people from digital, AI, and payments backgrounds. Really what we were looking for was curiosity and expertise. I think right now a lot of this is about knowing how to create the right integrations, but then there are a ton of partnerships that we need across the business. I mentioned identity before. Being able to know who the customer is really important in an agentic experience. Being able to know how to integrate with what our partner is going to need in that experience. There's also a lot of relationship building that's happening here. This is being shaped as all of us are in the room together. And so being able to have the conversations where we disagree across the table, right? Where one of the tech partners or one of the merchant partners just has a different vision on where this is going to go. Our team is an innovation team that lives and dies by some mantras that we have. We really believe in the disagree and commit mantra. That's important to us. We disagree in the room, and then when we leave that room, we're committed to what our outcome was. And we're really focused on being sure that we celebrate some of the failures and learn from it. We look at it as a way for us to take that and put it on a shelf and say, what would have to change next time? What would that catalyst be to take it back down if it's not something we can immediately pivot to?
I love disagree and commit. That's a great mentality. Yeah, I think you raised something interesting there, and I want to use it as a way into talking about some of the actual capabilities, some of those protocols, maybe not at the acronym level, but at least at the conceptual level. One of the wormholes I've got into over the past month, as I was telling someone earlier today, was this notion of a negotiation economy and a negotiation layer. And just conceptually, it really blew my mind around thinking about how I would have to identify Mike as a person or his agent, how I would have to potentially real-time evaluate him for risk across many potential products in the event that the one product is not the most ideal to that agent to make that purchase, and how I may be doing that dynamically in real time against other financial institutions across many merchant sets because the agent is scanning both at the same time. That is a mind-exploding concept from where we sit today, but a very distinct reality. And I use that as just one pause and comment on that if you wish. And then two, let's just kind of talk about how all of those things need to come together technically and otherwise in order to start making that a reality.
We talk a lot about the acronyms, right? So A to A is probably one of the ones most people are familiar with, which is agent to agent. And that's what's going to power not only agentic commerce, but so much of what I know people in this room want to do in their own companies, right? To be able to automate things they haven't been able to automate before. I think what you're getting at a little bit is pretty interesting, which is what happens when that agent starts to either negotiate with my agent on the bank site or a partner's agent on their merchant site. What happens when it's doing that at scale? What does that mean for a bandwidth problem? What does it mean for whether or not I want to engage there? And then I think one of the other questions there is what happens when those machine customers, when those bots, when those agents are interacting with our humans on our side? When it's making the call to the contact center, when it's opening the chat experience, when it's having that conversation, do they know how to authenticate? Do we trust that authentication? Do we trust whatever it's asking us? Those things are really important for us to be able to answer.
Yeah. So let's kind of continue into some of the conceptual, capabilities that need to be there. You briefly touched on earlier merchants needing to be able to have their inventory and services available and machine readable to be considered. There's also a component of that for that to be validated as a merchant from a financial institution perspective, right?
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, being able to actually know who that person is, what that transaction is, all of that validation, it adds potentially steps. So there are protocols now that are out there that would add steps where both the bank and the merchant have the ability to review the transaction in the intent layer before the authorization goes through. We haven't introduced new things in the auth flow in quite some time. So that's a pretty material change.
Yeah. And then there are emerging capabilities around identifying agents, which is critical to that trust factor that we talked about, right? To be able to identify that an agent is a legitimate agent acting on behalf of a legitimate human being with the authorization to make a transaction. So that's a core component as well, too, right?
It is. Yeah. I mean, you need to be able to know who that agent is. It needs to identify itself. It needs to tell you who it's acting on behalf of. And you have to make a determination if you're feeling comfortable with that. There are some retail partners who don't have guest checkouts anymore. So is it authenticating first? And if it is, am I comfortable with it authenticating and using my customer's credentials? Well, my customer probably gave those to the agent, so the customer is comfortable, but do they understand the risk of giving those credentials? There's so many other layers to peel back there.
Yeah, and I think as you get into some of that, you're getting into tokenization, right? And so tokenization as a mechanism to put some guardrails around what an agent is capable of doing, right? And so then there's tokenization on the consumer behalf and then that on your financial institution behalf as well, right?
Yeah, and I think some of those handshakes are going to be really important, right? We have really well-established protocols for how bots interact on the internet today. They're not laws, but we all kind of agree with a handshake that there are things that we should all follow. And in the last couple of years, there have been conversations about people who don't follow them. I think we're going to see very similar things emerge here. So we do have the formal protocols, but I think then there's going to be additional things, which is really a conversation around, what is the expectation of a bot when it's coming to make that handshake?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. And then, of course, within your organization, if we take the far-fetched scenario of a negotiation economy, you're having to potentially think about evaluating credit risk real time across an individual. And then if there are trillions of transactions going on across your portfolio of customers, potentially across multiple product sets, if you're wanting to maintain top of wallet loyalty status with that customer as well too. So there's many things from an integration perspective that need to be available in partnership with merchants for your capabilities to originate, to evaluate.
I mean, I think some of that goes back to how we think about products in an agentic space. So if I have an agent that I consider a concierge, I probably expect that agent to be able to suggest things to me that maybe I didn't even ask. And in a current, environment, maybe you get some slightly dynamic things, right? Hey, this is as low as $56 a month, or things that feel like a little bit personalized for you. But that experience of being able to now have things that are hyper personalized are really important.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's got to be some dynamic rules and decision engines that come into play here, right? The way that you put barriers around the way your interactions happen with that consumer and with those merchants, right? So that's going to become a critical layer as well, too, as that intelligence logic that you kind of build back into your product set to make decisions for you on behalf in real time.
Yeah, I think that's key. I mean, being able to make those decisions and have those key conversations with the agent or with the person that's behind the agent, there are going to be things that you're going to have to say as an organization you're not comfortable with happening. And I think being able to stand behind that and then adapt as things start to change as it moves on, you need to be able to really experiment and evaluate how your own products change. What you have today that's been built to talk to a person might not be the thing that you need to have to talk to an agent.
Yeah, and of course, all the auditability and the traceability records that you need from regulatory risk and compliance perspectives as well too. Maybe let's wrap this section there with, we didn't really talk about the needs of agents, right? And it's similar when I've talked to people in the past about developer portals and integration capabilities. It's often an ignored persona that is critical to the actual commercialization of something. And so, what are some of those things that people are having to start thinking about in terms of machine readability and access to merchants, to agents that are critical?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things we've been talking about a lot is, does the agent understand your products, your website, your information? Because if not, it's probably going to move on, right? It's not going to try to figure it out. And so we mentioned the protocols, but it is also about really identifying, where was the agent successful when it tried to make a purchase on my site? Where did it find my products? Where did it get things just wrong? Maybe I am trying to seed some of my product information into these platforms, and I'm finding that, in fact, it's not giving the right information. And by not giving the right information, we're having customers who get really confused. And so all of that becomes really important as you try to figure out where your products go.
Yeah. What, if anything, did I miss from capabilities or ways that you're going to think about approaching this as Synchrony? Is there anything in terms of the ways that you're thinking about agentic commerce today, or anything that you're seeing in the market that you want to leave folks with as they potentially go back to their jobs and think about approaching this themselves?
I mean, I think an inherent curiosity is really important right now. I'll be really candid. I have not always been able to get agentic commerce experiences to work for myself. There are times I've been successful, and there are times that I tried very hard to be able to make a purchase. I sat with it probably much longer than many people would have, and it didn't work. And being able to form your opinions around that, being able to really explore, what does that mean? What do I think would have happened to a consumer? How long is it going to take for the customer to come back? Right? That's something we talk about a lot. If these experiences aren't good quickly, you think of anyone that in your life that maybe is on the bubble of being technology savvy. The first time it doesn't work for them, it's going to take years before you can convince them again that this is going to work. And so I think that curiosity and that ability to form an opinion right now around these products, and the ability to really consider what that means if you are building something today. Because I think up until now, many companies have said, well, I'm going to make sure my existing products are in that platform. That obviously needs to happen. We've talked about that for the last 45 minutes. You also need to consider, what products do I need to have, or what tweaks do I need to make that work differently in this system? That same thing happened when we moved online, right? I know I keep kind of going back to this, 30 years ago analogy, but I do think that's really important to consider, right? Consumers began shopping very differently online. The wander doesn't exist the same way, right? I know what I'm searching for. What, as you as a user, when you start to use this, do you find yourself doing differently? I find personally, I'm describing things in a way probably in more detail than I would describe to a family member. Because I brain dump and I don't use punctuation and I kind of just throw it all in there as I'm thinking it because I know the AI can solve it for me. But what does that mean for when somebody else does that and do they understand your products?
Yeah, I think it takes us full circle, Mike, back to the notion of what people don't like. And cart abandonment is not something folks like. And it has a distinct behavior for that human when we go back to that notion of if you have a failure pathway, you're unlikely to pursue that same pathway again, right? And so I think one of the last questions I have, and then I will open it up to the audience here in person as well as virtually, is, what do you see the next year, the next 3 years, the next 5 years looking like in terms of this adoption curve? What does each of those frames of time look like in terms of the user experience, and how do the roles of the merchant and the consumer and the financial institution particularly evolve over that period?
Yeah, so I think when we look at what those cycles look like, at least in the US, oftentimes we're talking about the holiday season, right? I've referred back to the holiday season. That's when I know, at least personally, I am most frantic about shopping. It is not my favorite thing to do. And so when I have to do it for 15 people, that is pretty tough for me. And so I think you're going to see a lot of people try to push for learnings ahead of the holiday shopping season so that they can really test some of those new hypotheses that they have. I think over the next couple of years, you're going to see merchants really adopt this, not only in the platforms, but on their own sites. What they're finding is that when somebody comes to their site, it is easier for the person to be able to create that same description if they just prefer that retailer, right? I have a home improvement store that I happen to prefer. I'm just going to start there. But if they have an agentic agent on their site that can help me, where I can describe what's happening to my refrigerator, or I can ask it questions like, what could I get for under $2,000 delivered in 3 days? Could I have found that on my own? Of course I could have, but that's going to be way easier for me. And so I would look to that. And then I would also say, look for where net new products are coming in the next couple of years. I think there are going to be a lot of spaces where people adapt and create products that we don't have today. I think that's going to be where some of the excitement really lives.
No, I love it. And I do think, always critical from adoption is there's going to be hesitancy. There's going to be short-term friction, short-term caution, increases in fraud that are going to create fear cycles. But those companies that do create a valuable exchange, to your point, even if that value exchange isn't the full Agentic Commerce Act, are going to be the ones that likely get adoption and trust and build a relationship there.
And that curiosity and experimentation I mentioned before, I think is so important right now, right? You said, what was the estimate? 2% of transactions. Even if you assume it's double that, if you test a new product right now, or you allow agents to come onto your site and you learn from it, for many, I think that's less material than when it hits 25 or 50%. And so if you're coming into the market, once you see the adoption hit, you don't have the opportunity to learn how your customers, not the market, but your customers in particular, engage with this. And so now you're going to be opening yourself up potentially to wider failures or wider successes.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And was at a conference in the industry last week, and the message was largely, agentic commerce is happening, whether you are ready for it or not. And so I think it's a critical message to be thinking about being curious, experimenting, readying the things that you need to protect your interests wherever they lie in that.
Yeah, I think that's right.